Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 13 of the Burgh Breakdown. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, and considering what the weather has currently been doing, we have to start with the NFL and the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, it is football weather, after all. I mean, highs of 72 to 73, lows in the 50s. It's just starting to feel like fall, and it's starting to feel like football. Real football, not preseason football, is right around the corner. As fun as it's been to get a look at the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers, very excited to see the present start to take the field as the season gets closer and closer. So with that, the Steelers got some very encouraging news to start the week because it was a rough game number 2 to close out preseason week 2. They did not play well against the New York Jets, but we're going to leave that in the past for right now. Let's talk a little bit about preseason week 3 because they get Maxi Honachor back at practice. They get DK Metcalf back at practice. They get Michael Pittman back at practice. They get Brandon Echols back at practice. There's a whole laundry list of players that have returned from injury early in preseason week 3 and just enough time to probably be ready to go for week 1 of the NFL season when the Steelers take on the Atlanta Falcons. But the thing about being ready for week 1 is it's probably predicated on how much experience you have coming into this season. So for a guy like Maxi Honachor, the 2026 first round pick who had really turned heads early out in Latrobe, it feels like it might be a little too late for him to earn that starting job by week number 1. Don't get me wrong. Dylan Cook has not been great this preseason. He hasn't been god-awful. He hasn't been in a situation where you're saying maybe he doesn't even make the team, like Broderick Jones is currently in. But you look at Dylan Cook, and he's certainly not an incumbent starter that is infallible, right? There's a likelihood here that at some point, Maxi Honachor is going to surpass Dylan Cook and become the starting right tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and that's going to come probably early in the season. But I don't think there's any need to rush Maxi Honachor into being the starting right tackle in week 1 specifically. He's still relatively new-ish to the game. I don't think that plays as big of a factor as the fact that he's a rookie in the National Football League. If this was a guy who had played 3 years of college football coming off of an entire lifetime of high school and mini mites and all of that, I still think that I would have the same opinion here. You do not need to rush him into the starting lineup. I think Dylan Cook can hold up enough for you in the first couple of weeks of the season while Honachor gets his feet back underneath him and starts to gain that momentum. It's the same thing that we see in every sport. When a player misses that much of training camp and that many opportunities like Honachor has, he didn't play in preseason game number 1. He didn't play in preseason game number 2. Hopefully, he is good to go for the preseason finale on Thursday night against Buffalo to get him some live reps at the NFL level. But I think you need to get him a, quote, full camp of reps from now until he's ready to take over as the starting right tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that is playing in the preseason finale. And then I would say that's 3 to 4 weeks of actual practice, of staying healthy and being available and getting reps in practice on the South Side. That includes this week. That includes the weird in-between week where there's the roster cuts, but for the most part, for a guy like Honachor, it's a full practice week without a game going into the season, and then he has week 1, then he has week 2, and then by week 3, I think you'd really have a conversation if Dylan Cook is struggling, which who knows where he's going to be by week 3 of the season, then you have kind of a reevaluation period of, is it time to give Maxi Hanachor a chance to be the right tackle? Is it time to get him into game action as a rookie on this offensive line? So while I do really like what we've heard from Maxi Hanachor, I like the fact that we have a young, talented right tackle who a lot of people have faith in. I don't think there's any need to rush him into the starting lineup, especially for week 1, considering he's missed his entire pretty much training camp up to this point. So excited to see him back on the field. And I think this is a player that you're going to see be a huge piece for the Steelers this year, but that doesn't mean that you need to rush him into playing week 1. Another player that came back on Monday that is absolutely massive for the Pittsburgh Steelers is somebody who's been injured since day 1 of training camp. Since the Steelers arrived in Latrobe, this guy has been on the PUP list, and that's Jalen Ramsey. He's missed all that time due to a knee injury. When you're already a veteran player who is towards the tail end of your career, dealing with a knee injury at the start of the season is not great news. But it's good to see Jalen Ramsey get back on the field with a couple of weeks to ramp up into the regular season, because the Steelers need, and I can, capitalize this, italicize this, underscore this, they need him to create havoc this year in the slot cornerback position. And the good thing is they have better depth. At least it seems as if they have better depth to keep him there, because that was the issue last year. Deshaun Elliott goes down. They had no other options at the safety position, and Jalen Ramsey was forced into a position that he really had not played in a very long time at the highest level. But you look this year at the cornerback spot, obviously they're trying to figure things out with Joey Porter Jr. We could have an entire episode on that entire saga, but we're choosing not to for the purposes of this show. But outside of him, you have Asante Samuel Jr., who's had a really good camp and looks like he's ready, if Joey Porter is not going to be there on opening day, to be able to step in and be a starter for the Steelers team. You have Dalen Everett, who's been really good and seems to be a really good depth piece for the Pittsburgh Steelers. When healthy, is a good 4, which is great for them to have, as Ramsey bumps down to being the 5th guy that they need to call on to go to the outside. At the safety position, Deshaun Elliott is seemingly ramping up to be ready to go and have no restrictions at the start of this season. And Jaquan Brisker, there is still some questions. He did not return to practice, one of a few players that remain injured and on the shelf. But as of right now, there has been no indication that he's not going to be ready for the start of the season. And then you have a guy like Robert Spears-Jennings, who's been a training camp darling, who stepped up and really has put himself in the driver's seat to be safety number 3 on this roster. So with all of that in mind, it tells you that, hey, Jalen Ramsey can do what Jalen Ramsey was brought in here to do, which was to be kind of a chaos creator in that slot cornerback position. So I'm excited to see what that looks like when it goes according to plan, because last year, I think we can all agree, him playing safety as much as he did wasn't according to plan. And because of that, you didn't get the best version of Jalen Ramsey, even at the age he is now. But the only question I have now with Jalen Ramsey is, how long does it take him to get up to speed, right? He's in his 30s. So how long does it take him coming back from a knee injury to be able to get back to that full speed, to be able to be ready when the season begins in just 2.5 weeks at this point? We saw last year how important he was early in the season, making huge plays against the New York Jets that got the Steelers a victory, and then making a couple big plays in week number 2 against the Seattle Seahawks, despite it being a losing effort. But he was at his best early in the season last year, and then he faded as the year went on. If he's able to be healthy by week number 1, fully healthy, no restrictions, that's going to be a huge, huge addition to the Pittsburgh Steelers that we were just uncertain of before this week. Let's not mince words when talking about the Pittsburgh Pirates. This weekend was ugly. I think that's a nice way of putting it. I mean, getting swept in Los Angeles is one thing. We mentioned it going into the weekend of how important this road trip was, and that LA is the series that you could stand to lose, but getting swept makes it a lot more difficult to do the miraculous thing and come back in this wild card race. But losing two that you should have won makes it a little bit worse. Losing that game on Friday night when you were able to fight back with a huge home run from O'Neal Cruz and you go into extra innings, you need to be able to pull that one out. You get to extra innings, you have a tie game in a game where you had to take on one of the hottest pitchers in all of baseball in Yoshinobu Yamamoto. You need to be able to steal that one, and they couldn't. And then the next day, you're in the game. You get off to a great start. You go up 3-0. You need to be able to stay out in front of that one. And they fall in that one. And then Sunday against Blake Snell, they just never really had a chance. They really didn't, especially considering the way that Carmen Mlodzinski has been pitching since he got back into the rotation. But you add on the fact that the Philadelphia Phillies get a series sweep this weekend. You add on the fact that the San Diego Padres got a series sweep over the Minnesota Twins this weekend. And it was pretty much a disaster for the Pittsburgh Pirates, a team that had built some momentum for the first time really since the MLB All-Star break. To lose all of it and more in LA was awful. So they begin this week 63-69, 8.5 games back of a playoff spot. And while, yeah, a lot of people said it's curtains for them, they have no opportunities, they're done. You looked at this week as an opportunity because of who they played against in the final 6 games of this road trip. And that's why I say, even when they were at 8.5 games back, they weren't dead yet because they have an opportunity directly in front of them to make up the ground that they lost this weekend, quite frankly. If you get that series sweep against the San Diego Padres, which I understand, it's a far-fetched idea considering how red hot the Padres have been, especially at Petco Park since the All-Star break. But if you're able to sweep both series against the Padres and Cardinals, you're right back in the thick of things. In fact, you're probably closer than you were when you left for this road trip a couple of days ago. But I think the minimum, though, to keep the Pirates alive in this is 5-1. You need to be able to sweep one of these series and win the other one at a minimum. Because if you do, and specifically if you sweep the Padres, all of a sudden you go from 8.5 back to 5.5, which is where you were before the Dodgers series. You completely erase that Dodgers series. And I understand you're 6 games closer to the end of the season and there's less than 30 to go at this point, but you get back within 5.5 with an opportunity to really do some damage and surpass a team in the Cardinals over the weekend. Not only that, you then gain momentum going into a September where you have a lot of matchups against teams who are out of the race completely, teams that you should be able to pick apart when you're a team that's fighting for a playoff spot like the Pirates are. The thing is, they hadn't really shown signs of life. Yes, they had that 2 series at home where they beat the Tigers and they were able to beat the Boston Red Sox on top of that. And that was great. But going up against NL teams that are playoff bound, or at the very least appear to be playoff bound, you need to show signs of life. And fortunately enough, that's exactly what they did on Monday evening. You get multiple signs of life from this team that you haven't really gotten at all over the past several weeks. For one, Nick Gonzalez, who's been on a hitless streak, is able to come up big in the 12th inning to get you that eventual game-winning run. That was huge for the Pittsburgh Pirates. As Merlin Valdez hits his first home run since July 26th. And it feels weird because it feels like he's still brand new for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And yet he hasn't hit a home run in almost a month. And that was one of the biggest reasons that they were able to stay afloat shortly after the losses of O'Neal Cruz, after the loss of Connor Griffin, after the loss of Spencer Horwitz, was because Esmeralda Valdez stepped up in a big way, not just by being a professional hitter, which he had been for a while. The strikeouts are still an issue, but because of his pure power, the fact that he was able to get up to 14 home runs in what felt like an instant. And then he's stuck on 14 for about a month. Now that he's been able to break through, now that he's been able to see that ball leave the yard, maybe that gets the ball rolling and gets him back to the version that he was through most of June and most of July, because they're going to need that if they want to make a miracle run here in September. The bullpen being able to pick up one of their own instead of just add on to the struggles was also nice to see. Luke Weaver did not have his best outing. In fact, over the last week, he's had 2 outings where you look at it and you go, man, that just doesn't feel like the guy that we bought on deadline day. It doesn't feel like the guy that came over and everybody looked at and said, man, that is a bona fide closer. And that's going to happen. That's relief pitching in baseball. It happens sometimes. You don't have your best stuff, and you're going up against a team who, mind you, has one of the hottest offenses in the entire MLB over the past month, and he gives up a run. And the game is tied, and Braxton Ashcraft loses the opportunity to get his 14th win of the season, but there's still a game to be won. Mason Montgomery comes in, cleans up the 8th inning. He comes back out, has a clean sheet in the 9th inning. And then you go into extras, and to play 3 extra innings on the road against that offense and put up 3 zeros, that takes a lot. That takes a lot from the Pittsburgh Pirates bullpen, and they deserve a heck of a lot of credit for what they were able to do. Camilo Doval, Kirby Yates, and then Yohan Ramirez, who I understand there's been a couple of outings for him as well over this past week that have been pretty rough. I mean, the one where he returned from paternity leave against the Detroit Tigers wound up being the difference in that game as they lost 8-5. And then, of course, we saw what happened in LA against the Dodgers, but he comes in with an opportunity to get a save in the 12th inning, and he goes 3 up, 3 down, 3 strikeouts for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And now all of a sudden, he's bordering on a 2 ERA. I mean, a 3 flat ERA, but having a 2 in his ERA. And all of a sudden you look at him and you're like, man, I feel like nobody appreciates the fact that he's been able to string together such a good stretch that he's going to be somebody who could finish this season with under a 3 ERA. He is at times a wild thing, and I think we can all tell by the first time he throws his sweeper. When he throws that first sweeper, if it is completely out of the zone and lost, you know it's going to be a rough ride. But for the most part, over the past 2 months, he's been dialed in, and he's been huge for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And the bullpen came up huge for the Pirates in that game on Monday night. And then, of course, the sign of life that we all kind of expected to see is Braxton Ashcraft. He did it again. That's 3 consecutive starts where he was lights out. And if it wasn't for an interesting situation with the balk call in I think that was the 6th inning, then we probably would have seen him come out and get through the 7th inning as well, because he was rolling before that call was made. And then a great at-bat from Jake Cronenworth just made his pitch count get even higher. And then, of course, another extended at-bat against Manny Machado, and that was about curtains for Braxton Ashcraft. But he was unhittable for a 3rd consecutive start. The Padres didn't have a base runner get past first base until that 6th inning when there was a leadoff double. So it's nice to see. It was, I think, mostly expected from Braxton Ashcraft, because when he's in the form that he's in right now, he is an all-star this season. The one thing, though, is that is something they can't carry over to tonight's game. And that's where you look at Paul Skeens. He is on the rubber tonight, and yes, it's a Lelandism that Don Kelly has carried over into his time as a manager for the Pirates. You're only as good as your next day's starting pitcher. And coming into the season, if I had told you that and then told you the next day's starting pitcher was Paul Skeens, you'd be confident that they could turn 1 win into 2. But the way Paul Skeens has been pitching, it's going to be an adventure. They need Skeens to figure something out, because they need this series. Not just a win, they need a sweep to get them back to where they were, to get them back to 5.5 games out of a wild card spot when they head back east to take on the St. Louis Cardinals. And then they need Bubba to follow on Wednesday in that afternoon game to close out this series. Those are the 2 biggest things for the Pirates to continue to have life, for the Pirates to continue to keep this season alive, to keep playoff hope alive. As slim as the chances might be, there's still a chance. and they need Paul Skeens and Bubba Chandler to keep opening that door bit by bit if they want to keep this season alive, especially with reinforcements like Connor Griffin, just about a week and some change away, potentially, with a guy like Ryan O'Hearn a couple of weeks away, potentially. They need to continue to just kick that can down the line and shrink that gap between them and the San Diego Padres one game at a time. The best way to do it is to do it directly, and they have that chance tonight and tomorrow to get back to 5.5 games back, and then they need a really good September to come out on the other side of things with their first playoff appearance since 2015. It's a long shot, but never say never, because crazier things have happened. Marc-Andre Fleury is headed to the Penguins Hall of Fame, a statement that felt like an inevitability, and if it didn't, you just didn't pay attention over the past 2 decades, as the Penguins announced their class of 2026 last week. When they brought back the Penguins Hall of Fame in 2025 and mentioned the one rule that, hey, you have to have been retired for at least one season, that just felt like, hey, we're going to tell you pretty much without telling you that Marc-Andre Fleury will be inducted as part of next year's class. And fast forward to last Thursday, and we find out that was exactly the case. So Fleury gets the nod in his first year of eligibility alongside Larry Murphy, Jim Rutherford, and if you don't know, the initial owner and founder of the Pittsburgh Penguins, Jack McGregor. If you look at Fleury specifically and his career, first overall pick, Pittsburgh franchise leader in nearly every statistical category for goaltending, a 3-time Stanley Cup champion, and even beyond his time with the Penguins. He was a 2018 Western Conference champion with the Vegas Golden Knights. He was a 2021 Vezina Trophy winner, and he is second all-time in NHL history in wins. So, was this a guarantee? Yes, there are certain things that when Marc-Andre Fleury hung up his skates, he had to have known, hey, that's a matter of when and not if. Penguins Hall of Fame is one of them. The Hockey Hall of Fame is another. I don't know if he'll be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but he will be a Hockey Hall of Famer at some point. They're always weird when it comes to goaltenders, but it feels like there's a chance that Marc-Andre Fleury gets the call the second he's eligible for that Hall of Fame as well. The question that I think of is, beyond that, what other honors is Marc-Andre Fleury going to receive? I think the big one that everybody thinks about is his number in the rafters. Will the Penguins retire the number 29 for Marc-Andre Fleury? If you look at it right now, they have 3 numbers in the rafters at PPG Paints Arena. The number 21 for Michel Briere, the number 66 for Mario Lemieux, and those two stood alone for a very long time before Jaromir Jagr was added a couple of years back. But there's only 3. And think of all the Hall of Famers. Think of all the names that contributed to that 1991 and 1992 Stanley Cup team. And it was only Lemieux and Jagr who have their names forever immortalized in the rafters at PPG Paints Arena. So they've set a standard there that they're not going to give out retired numbers easily. It's not going to be something where you have 15 or 16 retired numbers. It's going to be something that's very selective for the Penguins organization. I think it's a matter of time until we see Sidney Crosby. I think that is an inevitability, easy for me to say. And I think Evgeny Malkin you can include in that as well. The question that I have is, will they actually retire Marc-Andre Fleury, and will they actually retire Chris Letang's number as well? I think beyond that, the door is closed. There is nobody else that we have seen take the ice for the Pittsburgh Penguins that has anywhere close to the resume to get up there with Briere, Lemieux, and Jagr. I think it's those 4. Malkin, Crosby are definites. And then it's just a matter of, do they want to open it to Marc-Andre Fleury and Chris Letang? The case for Fleury, I think, is there. And I think Letang will get there as well, personally. But I think the case for Fleury is pretty airtight. I mean, they broke the having to be a career Penguin thing when they put Jaromir Jagr up there in the rafters, because Jagr spent more time away from Pittsburgh in his career. 13 years, at least, even if we just distill it down to his NHL career. Jagr spent 13 NHL seasons away from Pittsburgh and only 11 in Pittsburgh. Now, he was a team captain. He was a 2-time Stanley Cup champion. He is one of the 10 greatest players in the history of the sport. But that made the case that you don't have to be a career Penguin like Mario Lemieux or, Michel Briere for how short his career was and the circumstances that led to him getting his number retired. But they hadn't had somebody who played for a different franchise in the rafters until Jaromir Jagr was put up there a couple of years ago. And not to mention the fact that Marc-Andre Fleury is in a very exclusive club that the other members of will be in the rafters. Marc-Andre Fleury is one of just 3 first overall picks in Penguins franchise history. The other 2, Mario Lemieux in 1984 and Sidney Crosby in 2005. And yes, those 2 are untouchable when it comes to the Pittsburgh Penguins and their organization and the place that they have in history. But that's a pretty exclusive club that you can't forget that Marc-Andre Fleury is a part of. He's also the number 1 Penguins goaltender of all time. I mentioned it earlier in this segment that he holds basically every record in Penguins history when it comes to goaltenders. And not only that, he is, in my eyes, a top 10 goaltender all time in the entire National Hockey League. I think that they will eventually retire the number 29, probably not this season, probably a little bit later down the road, but I think the number 29 eventually finds its way into the rafters at PPG Paints Arena. And if you really want my maybe tinfoil hat conspiracy, I don't think, Fleury has been retired for a year. There is a lot of speculation that this will be Evgeny Malkin's final year. Who knows how much longer Chris Letang has? He has 2 years left on his current contract. Sidney Crosby, the end is not in sight, at least as of right now. Yes, he has 1 year left on his contract, but it sounds like, at least from everything we've heard, that Sidney Crosby isn't thinking, all right, 1 or 2 more years. He's thinking, as of right now, I don't know when the end's going to be because it doesn't feel like I'm close to it yet. I feel like there won't be a 29 in the rafters. There won't be a 71 in the rafters. There won't be a 58 in the rafters until Sidney Crosby. I think Sidney Crosby will have to be the first of those 4 to get his number retired. And at some point, it will be 21, 66, 68, and 87. And then after that, the other 3 may follow. But I think you're going to have to wait for Sidney Crosby to go up there first. And that might be, when Sidney Crosby says, I'm going to retire at the end of this season, that might be the first game of the following season that they put his number in the rafters. But I think his number needs to go up before 71, 29, and 58, especially if those last 2 wind up going up there. But first things first, Marc-Andre Fleury will be inducted into the Penguins Hall of Fame on November 14th. It'll be another weekend of celebration in the city of Pittsburgh. It seems like there have been a lot of celebrations for Marc-Andre Fleury, and rightfully so. This guy was a first overall pick. He was really the first piece of what ended up being a crazy, crazy run for the Pittsburgh Penguins in the Sidney Crosby era. He did it at a position that has a bigger spotlight on you than any other in the National Hockey League. And while, yes, there were some years where his playoff performance may have cost the Penguins more success in this run, you cannot deny that he is the greatest goaltender in the history of the Penguins organization, and he is one of the best in the history of the entire sport and deserves to be honored as such. So excited to see the Flower back in Pittsburgh, excited to see him continue to be honored as an all-time Penguins legend. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Burgh Breakdown. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. And remember, you can find us on YouTube at Nick Belsky, or you can catch us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. We'll see you guys next time.